Hello, friends. This is Confessions with Amy, and I'm glad you're visiting my channel. Here we share new confessions every day.
Have you ever woken up in someone else's body? No, I'm not talking about science fiction. I'm talking about when you open your eyes and realize that you're not the same person you were the day before. The world has changed. You've changed. Your chest is empty. And you can't believe you're breathing because everything you knew was destroyed to the ground. My name is Diane Mason. I am a 55-year-old woman, head of a regional charitable foundation in Oregon. The wife of Richard Mason is a seemingly reliable, intelligent man with whom I have lived for 27 years. And a man who, as it turned out, was just waiting for me to weaken so that he could finish me off. I woke up in the intensive care unit. No drama, just my heart couldn't stand it. Fatigue, overexertion, endless meetings, paperwork, donations, reports, taking care of the house, taking care of the husband, taking care of everything but yourself. I've always been reliable, the one you go to when someone else's world collapses. So here I was, hooked up to the monitors, and the nurse was checking my pulse as if it belonged to her. First I felt the oxygen tube in my nose, then the smell of antiseptic. White light, distant voices, and then loneliness. The chair next to it was empty. No one. Not even Richard. Richard? Where is he? I automatically reached for the phone, which someone had carefully placed on the nightstand. With shaking fingers, I unlocked the screen. Not a single notification from him. No phone call, no text message. Just one, received the day before. At 3:14 a.m. I read it once, then twice. You deserve it. After all I've done for you. No honey, no hold on. Just cold anger. Every word was like a slap in the face. I didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. My head was a mess, but I knew in my gut that it wasn't just resentment. Something's happened. I opened the banking app. Our shared account, which we had used for most of our lives, paying bills, mortgages, saving for retirement, was empty. I scrolled through the latest transactions, withdrawals, transfers, everything for the last 3 days. While I was unconscious, he took out every cent. To offshore companies, to my personal account, or to a bank card that I never had. He knew. He waited. He was getting ready. The world froze in that second. It wasn't just a stab in the back. It was a deliberate, methodical calculation. He saw my illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. I was lying on the edge of death, and he was running translations from the laptop in our bedroom, probably humming to himself. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone against the wall like in a cheap movie. I just stared at the screen and felt the last drop of trust in the person I shared everything with disappear. I thought back to when we bought the house, as he stood with a cup of coffee on our balcony. How on my 50th birthday, he gave me some earrings and said, "You are my everything." Lie. Or worse, the game. I slowly put the phone down on the blanket. I took a deep breath. My pulse seems to be racing. The phone beeped, and the nurse came running. "Are you all right?" she asked. I nodded. No, I wasn't fine. But something inside me was already burning. Not fear, not pain. Anger. Quiet, collected, rational anger. And that anger no longer allowed me to be the woman who saved everyone but myself. I picked up the phone again. I opened the camera. She raised her hand. One finger. Average. I took a picture. I sent it to Richard. Without words. It was the first and last message he would receive from me. He thinks he's won. Thinks that his text message is the last point. He has no idea how wrong he was. I was discharged 2 days later. They tried to persuade me to stay. Observation, recovery. You must be careful, Mrs. Mason. But I looked at these kind people and realized that none of them knew that I was no longer the woman to be intimidated by weakness. My heart was pounding again, and with each beat I felt myself getting stronger. My house greeted me with silence. Not cozy, but scorched, like after a fire. Everything looked in its proper place, but I felt like there was no soul in it anymore. And it probably hasn't been there for a long time. I just didn't want to see it. I didn't want to admit that Richard had left me long before this betrayal, mentally, emotionally, really. His body was still there, but his soul had been searching for a way out for a long time. I sat on the edge of the couch and opened my laptop. The passwords were not changed. I knew where copies of documents were, I knew bank routes, I knew who he worked with, and he knew I knew. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought I was going to break down, that I would choose sacrifice over combat. For 27 years, I was silent around him, smoothed corners, endured, explained his outbursts as stress, forgave lies, because everyone makes mistakes. I wasn't weak, I was attached. Love, habit, and the fear of being alone, call it what you will, but now it no longer had any power over me. I started small. I called the lawyer Caitlin. Smart, fast, with a cold squint that even men in expensive suits are afraid of. She was one of the few people I helped at the beginning of her career. Today is her turn. "Are you sure, Diana?" she asked. "After such a text message and such a transfer, we can tear it down to dust. We have everything, evidence, history, even moral superiority." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want to restore justice." He thought he could control my life. "And now I'll have mine." Caitlin laughed. "This is the first time I've heard such a voice from you." "I like him, you know." I made a list. Accounts are frozen. A power of attorney is issued to the lawyer, assets are tracked, and the house is being reissued. Everything that was jointly acquired will no longer belong to him alone. Did we split our lives in half? Fine. I'll take my half with interest. But most importantly, I started to rebuild myself. Not externally. Not with new earrings or a change of hairstyle. And inside. I woke up, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel alarmed. I didn't wait for him to come back. I didn't wonder what mood he'd be in. I couldn't stand the quiet of the evening like the silence before a storm. It was my silence. My air. My life. Sometimes, out of habit, I reached for the phone to text him. Tell him I'm home, or ask him if he bought milk. And every time I stopped myself. He's not part of my we anymore. And every day it became not a pain, but a freedom. He thought I was weak because I was in the hospital. But he had no idea that only by experiencing death, both literally and figuratively, could one truly be alive. I've spent my entire life helping others stand on their own 2 feet. And now I'm going up on my own. And no one will stop me. I didn't respond to his messages. Not because there was nothing to say, but on the contrary. I could have written him a whole story with facts, memories, and words that had accumulated in me over the years. But I chose silence. Because my silence spoke louder than anything else. You have no power over me anymore. The first message from him came 3 days later. Simple, "Diana, let's talk." I didn't answer. Then there was the second one. I think we both overreacted. I transferred the money, but let's not ruin everything. He was seriously trying to call it a mistake. Overreacting. Don't forget to buy bread on the way home. He stole it. Betrayed. Insulted me. And most importantly, he did it in cold blood while I was unconscious. On the 4th day, he called. I saw his name flash up on the screen. My hands didn't waver. I calmly transferred the call to my answering machine. I listened to his voice, tense, uncertain. He asked for forgiveness. He said he did it because he didn't know if I would survive. That I wanted to protect myself. That things got out of hand. I turned off the sound and got back to business. Caitlin moved quickly. We have already frozen the joint account, launched a financial review, and issued an urgent court request for a refund. It turned out that he not only transferred money, he tried to withdraw part of it to an offshore company. I think he's forgotten that I'm not only his wife, but also a certified public accountant who spent years keeping internal records of his businesses. He built his empire because of me, and now it's all coming back like a boomerang. Meanwhile, I went back to work. My team's surprisingly resilient. Kind people met me not as a victim, but as a leader. I didn't tell them everything, just the essentials. They figured out the rest for themselves. With each passing day, I could feel my energy returning. I would wake up at 6 a.m. like I used to and go for a run. I was drinking black coffee again, not diluted with milk, as he liked it. I turned the music up. I called old friends I hadn't written to in years because Rich had plans. I was no longer part of his plans. And I loved it. A week later, he wrote, "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Everything we had will disappear. I smiled, because I realized one thing. Everything we had is long gone. Only I held on to the illusion. Now I was holding on to the truth. For yourself. He was trying to hold on to power. Begged. Threatened. I promised to improve. He called my brother, my girlfriend, even our family lawyer, who we haven't talked to in a long time. He started to panic. Because I realized that I don't play dumb. I really did leave. And the harder it stretched, the higher I climbed. I was a woman who was betrayed in the hospital. And now I am a woman who has regained her name, dignity, and peace of mind. He, on the other hand, turned out to be a man who was left alone in an empty house, without money and without those who had previously tolerated his temper, because I was there. Revenge is not my way. I chose dignity, and it always wins in the long run. On the evening of the day I signed the formal waiver of the joint assets, I was sitting on the terrace of a new house, not luxurious, not huge, but my own. A small house in a South Portland neighborhood where the windows look out over the river and the neighbors say hello by name. The house I bought with my own money. Clear. Transparent. Without cheating. It was different here. The air smelled like freedom, not the perfume Richard had been forcing on me for years. There was no clinking of crystal or feigned conversation. Just me, my breath, and a cup of good, strong tea. Caitlin sent a report. The court took the side of truth. Financial fraud, attempted theft, and deliberate use of trust at a vulnerable moment. All this was recorded and confirmed. Not only did he lose access to the money, but he was also under official investigation. My phone rang again. Richard. I didn't even think to pick up the phone. There was only one word on the screen, block. And I clicked on it. At first there was a strange feeling. Something like a small part of me, that old, dependent part, still hoped it was a misunderstanding that he would explain. But that feeling was gone as quickly as it came. Because I knew the truth, I had survived. And not only physically, but emotionally. I came out of this story not broken, but reborn. The next morning, I met up with Jaina, a former colleague of mine. She saw me, smiled, and said, "You're glowing." I smiled back. I chose myself, I told her. And for the first time in many years, I live for myself and not contrary to someone's expectations. We talked for a long time, discussed the possibilities. She offered me to advise a startup that was developing in the same direction as my previous projects. I didn't immediately agree. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to agree to prove my worth to someone. I could choose. Meanwhile, Richard was collapsing. I knew because his former employees were starting to get in touch. One of them wrote, "He's going crazy. It can't handle it. It was all about you." I always knew that, but now I see it clearly. I didn't need to see him to know how he was feeling. It felt like the world had suddenly collapsed. The truth was that the world had collapsed because he'd built it on a lie. I wasn't happy about his downfall, but she didn't sympathize either. He made his choice. I made mine. I didn't need to take revenge anymore. My life was my biggest and most honest victory. I was sitting on the wooden porch of my temporary home in Sonoma, wrapped in a light wool blanket. It was a cool, clean morning with a faint smell of coffee and pine trees. The birds sang so confidently, as if they knew that a new chapter had begun here. Only now did I realize that at some point everything turned upside down. I was no longer running away. I'm building. It's been 3 weeks since the lawyer reported that Richard tried to completely reset our joint account. But I had documents, confirmations, and a transfer history. I acted quickly. My lawyers worked exactly right. The money was returned, almost to the last cent. And most importantly, the feeling of control returned with them. Something that he took away from me not only financially, but emotionally as well. I felt like I owned my life, for the first time in years. That same week, I officially filed for divorce. No scenes, no requests, no tears. Just a document that clearly stated, this marriage is over. Not my fault, but my choice. While my lawyers were handling the case, I was taking care of myself. For dinner, I invited a neighbor, a widow named Martha, with whom we talked until late in the evening. I started drawing again, a hobby I'd forgotten about 20 years ago. I completed half of an online course on interior design. Laughing. I watched comedies. Baked. She sipped her tea in silence. All this is for yourself. On my third weekend of single life, I got a text from Richard. It was short, as if he didn't dare say much. I was wrong. Things got out of hand. Can we talk? As I read his words, I felt quiet inside. No anger. No revenge. Only an amazing indifference. He no longer had any power over me. Not a single lever. And most importantly, I didn't want him back. While he was trying to recapture the conversation, or rather, regain control, I was participating in a charity auction for women who had experienced financial and emotional betrayal. There I told my story for the first time openly. And the women listened. They were crying. Supported. One even came up to me after the performance and said, "You didn't just survive. You set the pace." And maybe she was right. I didn't feel lost anymore. I wasn't looking for support. I became her. Sometimes I scroll back to moments when I was lying in a hospital room and felt like the world was falling apart. When he sent me that cynical message. When I saw the empty bill. When it seemed impossible to believe in yourself. But now I knew I didn't just come back. I've changed. I'm no longer the old Diana who lived in the shadow of someone else's decisions. I'm a new woman. And my life is in my hands. When I moved into my new home in Naples, Florida, it was symbolic. I was holding my keys exactly on the day our wedding anniversary was supposed to be. The house was bright, with white walls, French windows, and a green garden that I had planted myself with local gardeners. I stood in the doorway, looking out at the ocean, and I knew it was mine. It's not just housing. This is a house where there are no lies. No humiliation. There is no fear. I finalized my divorce. The trial did not last long. Its representatives did not try to fight. I think he knew he'd lost before the game even started. My lawyers defended every last cent. The court recognized his actions as financial violence and added a fine for attempting to deceive. He tried to contact me again, first politely, then plaintively, then aggressively. The last one was a voice message filled with despair. "Do you really think you can start over without me?" I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Not because I was in pain. It was because I didn't care anymore. I started teaching. Online courses where she taught women how to protect themselves legally, financially, and emotionally. I wrote articles. I was even invited to appear on a morning talk show in Miami. I came out in a light suit, with a straight back and an open smile. The question that the presenters asked me stayed with me for a long time. What would you say to yourself in the hospital? I didn't think twice about it. You're stronger than you think. Everything that seemed to be the end turned out to be the beginning. Life is not about always winning. Life is about getting up after a fall. Not because you need to, but because you deserve it. I've lived a long life of buckling. I was comfortable, obedient, reliable, and at some point, it all became my burden. Now I'm free. From the past. Out of fear. From other people's expectations. I'm Diana Rose. And I'll never let anyone dictate who I want to be again. The sun was setting as I poured myself a glass of wine and went out on the veranda. The waves rolled gently towards the shore, and gulls soared in the sky. His breathing was even and deep in his chest. I won. Not because I got my revenge, but because I chose myself. I will never choose otherwise again.